Welcome, everyone. Today we're looking into something quite complex. On June 12th, 2025, Air India Flight AI-171 crashed tragically. It was all over the news, understandably. But what makes this even more compelling, perhaps, is what else has been happening with Air India. Alongside this awful event, there's this story of a really significant financial turnaround since the airline was privatized. So today we're going to dive into both. The investigation, where there are still so many questions, and this quite dramatic financial recovery.
Absolutely. And for this deep dive, we've got some really interesting material. We're drawing on the initial investigative reports from India's Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau, the AAIB, and we're pairing that with detailed financial data, performance metrics, the numbers behind the turnaround. It gives you this quite nuanced picture of the airline right now facing huge challenges, yes, but also achieving some major successes.
Okay, let's start with the crash investigation then. The AAIB put out its preliminary report around July 11th to 13th, so roughly a month after the accident itself. And the core finding, well, it was immediately striking. It stated the Boeing 787-8 lost thrust seconds after takeoff. Why? Because both engine fuel cutoff switches moved from run to cutoff almost at the same time.
Yeah, pretty much simultaneously. That level of precision is alarming in itself.
It really is. And what did the cockpit voice recorder capture? That adds another layer, doesn't it?
It certainly does. The CVR picked up one pilot asking quite clearly, why did he cut off? And the immediate reply from the other pilot was, I did not do so. So right there in the cockpit, in those critical seconds, there's confusion, an immediate lack of understanding, or at least attribution for why the fuel was cut.
And the timeline is it's chilling. Although the investigation found the switches were later back in the RUN position, suggesting, someone tried to restart the engines,
Yeah.
it was too late. The delay, even if short, meant they couldn't regain altitude. The aircraft hit the ground within about 30 seconds of takeoff.
Just 30 seconds. It's incredibly fast. Virtually no time for any meaningful recovery action.
And this is where the regulatory side comes in, which the report mentioned.
Right. The report referenced a 2018 FAA advisory. This wasn't brand new information. The advisory warned about a possible lock failure on these specific fuel switches on the 787. But here's the crucial point. Air India hadn't performed follow-up inspections based on this advisory. And
Yeah.
the reason? The advisory wasn't mandatory.
Not mandatory. And that detail, well, it really fuels the debate, doesn't it? It highlights that gray area between recommendations and required actions in aviation safety.
Exactly. How airlines interpret and act on non-mandatory safety information, especially when a potential vulnerability is known. It's a critical aspect of risk management.
So, understandably, the reaction to this preliminary report has been, well, intense. Many aviation experts are saying it actually raises more questions than it answers, particularly around the how and the why. How did those switches physically move? And what was the reason behind it?
Precisely. And that lack of clear answers has led to significant calls for more transparency. We're hearing this from the victims' families, naturally, but also from pilot unions, industry analysts. There are concerns being voiced about, potential bias in the investigation, or maybe jumping to conclusions too soon about responsibility. They want a much deeper look.
So the speculation continues. You hear all sorts of theories. Was it some kind of freak accident, a mechanical malfunction maybe, or something more deliberate? Sabotage, pilot suicide. These possibilities, however disturbing, are still on the table because the why isn't clear.
Or perhaps a system issue that wasn't fully understood before. All these remain open questions.
Which leads to the next step, right? What are people demanding?
Well, there's a strong push from these stakeholders for a truly independent audit, or perhaps a broader probe. They want scrutiny on the switch design itself, a hard look at cockpit procedures, maybe training, and certainly a review of why regulatory advisories weren't perhaps followed up more rigorously. They want the full picture.
Okay, so that's the investigation side, complex, tragic, and far from resolved. Let's pivot now, because running parallel to this is, as we said, a completely different story for Air India. It's almost jarring to switch gears, but we need to talk about their financial recovery. It's been quite remarkable since privatization.
It really has. And to grasp the scale of it, you need a little context on the debt. Back in August 2021, before the handover, Air India was saddled with roughly 61,562 crore in total debt. That's about 8 billion US dollars, just massive.
An incredible amount. So how did the privatization deal handle that?
Well, the Tata Group, when they took over, agreed to assume 15,300 crore of that debt. But the rest, the bulk of it, around 46,000 crore, was shifted. It was moved into a special purpose vehicle, basically a separate holding company owned by the government, called AI Asset Holding Ltd., or AIAHL.
Right, I remember that structure. So the deal itself, late 2021, early 2022, Tata Sons puts in about 18,000 crore in equity, takes on that 15,300 crore debt. But crucially, the government effectively settled or ring-fenced that massive remaining debt pile held in AIAHL before the handover was complete.
Exactly. That move essentially wiped the slate clean for Tata's Air India, removing the vast majority of the legacy government liabilities. A huge advantage starting out.
And it seems to have paid off. Looking at the latest figures, fiscal year 2024-25, the numbers are pretty impressive.
They really are. Revenue is up about 11%, hitting 61,000 crore, which is roughly $7 billion US dollars. Passenger numbers also climbed, nearly 10% to 44 million. And maybe the biggest news, the real milestone, under their transformation plan, they call it Vihan.ai. They achieved core operational profit. That's a fundamental shift from years and years of operational losses.
Core operational profit, that's a big deal. And it shows in the overall loss reduction too, right?
Absolutely. In fiscal year 2023, the loss was still substantial, around 11,387 crore. But by FY 2024, that had shrunk dramatically to 4,444 crore. We don't have the official final numbers for FY 2025 just yet, but that trend line is clearly pointing in the right direction. Very positive.
Then they've been injecting fresh capital to keep this momentum going.
Yes, quite a bit. In FY 2024-25 alone, they secured 9,558 crore in new capital, a big chunk of that. 3,224.82 crore came directly from the parent, Tata Sons. And another significant injection, over 1,000 crore, came from Singapore Airlines. That was part of their investment related to their 25.1% stake, finalized around March 2025.
So what's this money for? Fleet modernization.
Primarily, yes. Modernizing the airline, expanding the fleet, they have huge orders placed, and very importantly, reducing their dependence on borrowing more money, building a stronger balance sheet.
Makes sense. So what's the long-term goal here? When do they expect to be fully in the black?
The stated goal, according to their 5-year turnaround roadmap, is to achieve overall profitability by fiscal year 2027.
FY 2027. Okay. And just to be clear for listeners, the debt figure often quoted now for Air India under Tata ownership is essentially that initial 15,300 crore they took on, which they've likely refinanced. The huge legacy debt is off their books.
Correct. That's the key difference post-privatization. It's a much leaner financial structure they're operating with now.
So it's quite the picture. We've covered these two starkly different narratives today. On the one side, you have the tragedy of Flight AI-171. So many unanswered questions, deep concerns about safety, procedures, accountability. And on the other side, you see this almost textbook case of financial turnaround, an airline pulling itself out of massive debt, growing, heading towards profitability under new ownership.
It really sets up a fascinating, maybe even unsettling final thought for you, our listeners. Think about this. What does it actually mean for a major global airline, an iconic brand like Air India, to be experiencing powerful financial recovery? At the very same moment, it's grappling with such profound, unresolved questions about basic operational safety stemming from a catastrophic accident. How might these two narratives, the recovery and the investigation, influence each other going forward? And what does this whole situation tell us about the immense complexities, the pressures, and maybe the inherent contradictions in managing a giant in the global aviation industry today? Something to really mull over.